Hi, my name's Kane, and I didn't expect to survive this, let alone tell it. My sister held me down in a courtroom bathroom and shaved my head. She said it was for order, for control, but truthfully, it was just to break me before I ever stepped onto that stand. What she didn't know was that the man I love, the one she laughed off as a nobody, was about to walk in wearing the robe she thought she owned. And when he took the bench, she wasn't ready for what he read out loud. But before I tell you what happened when the gavel fell, tell me, where are you watching this from? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments below. The air smelled of stone and humidity. Old Charleston wrapped in morning fog. My heels clicked on the courthouse steps, steady and sharp, echoing louder than I felt inside. I tightened my grip on the leather portfolio in my hand, the same one I carried into my dissertation defense years ago. That morning, I had felt prepared. Today, not so much. This wasn't supposed to be about me. I was just here to observe, maybe support. At least that's what I told myself. Inside, the marble floor shimmered under the sterile lights. The security guard barely looked up as I passed through, but others did. Eyes followed me with that look, the one that said, "Why is she here?" It was never direct, just small darts of glances from people I used to call family. I spotted them across the atrium. My mother's posture was stiff, arms crossed like she was bracing for impact. And Celine, my older sister, sitting effortlessly elegant in her ivory blazer, legs crossed, smirking like she'd already won something I didn't know I was competing for. I kept walking. A woman behind the registration table waved me over. Her tone was polite but impersonal. Name? Kane Monroe, I answered, offering a faint smile. She looked down at her list, frowned slightly, then handed me a badge. I took it without glancing, until I clipped it onto my blazer and felt a chill crawl up my neck. Printed in bold black letters, K, nobody. I blinked. This isn't right, I said, voice low but firm. It should say Monroe. Kaylin Monroe. The woman barely looked up. That's what the list says, ma'am. If you'd like to speak to someone, you'll have to wait. But you can't enter the courtroom without a badge. The words hit harder than they should have. I wasn't even surprised. Not really. From across the atrium, Celine was watching me. She raised her phone slowly, deliberately, and I saw the soft click of a snapshot as her screen reflected my badge. She tilted her head and grinned like a child who had pulled a prank and couldn't wait for the punchline. I didn't flinch. I just nodded and turned away. If this was a game, I wasn't going to give her the reaction she wanted. I adjusted the badge, smoothing it down against my chest like I wore it proudly. But my hand stayed there too long, pressed hard. I could feel the edges biting into my palm. It was like someone had scrawled the truth of how they saw me. Like I didn't matter. Didn't belong. Maybe they believed it. Maybe they wanted me to believe it too. The hallway to the courtroom was quiet. Too quiet. Each step I took felt heavier, like my shoes were sinking into the floor. My mother turned away when I passed, just slightly, but enough. This wasn't just about a court case. This was a message. The badge was a statement, and Celine had delivered it with flair. I found my seat on the far side, nowhere near the family rows. As I sat, I glanced down again. K, nobody. Not even a typo. A choice. Maybe I'd always been a ghost in this family. The quiet one. The one who said, sure, too easily. The one who didn't fight back because she thought being silent was the noble thing. Maybe they mistook my silence for weakness. I gripped the badge again, tighter this time, letting the edges dig in until I felt something sharp, like a warning. From across the aisle, Celine leaned over and whispered to our mother, then laughed behind her hand. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The court doors opened. People shuffled inside, heels clicking, papers rustling, the distant coughs of someone bored or bitter. I stood to enter. Celine passed by me slowly, her perfume trailing behind her like a second skin. She leaned in close, just enough so I could feel the warmth of her breath, as she whispered, "No one invited you, Kaylin. Just know that." She didn't wait for a response. And I didn't give her one, because I already knew what this was. This wasn't their custody hearing. It was mine. The door shut behind me with a quiet thud that echoed louder than it should have in a courtroom full of whispers and waiting eyes. I took a seat near the back, not far from the counsel table, but far enough to stay unseen, if such a thing were possible in a room designed for exposure. The badge still clung to my blazer like an insult I hadn't asked for. I sat up straight, crossed my legs, and tried to disappear into the fabric of the chair. The judge hadn't arrived yet. I wasn't on the docket. Not officially. I was only here to support a distant cousin's custody hearing. Or at least, that's what I had been told. That's the story Celine gave me anyway. Now, I wasn't so sure there ever was a cousin. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as Celine's attorney stood, smoothing the front of his suit with theatrical precision. His voice was calm but heavy with performative authority. "Your Honor, we'd like to begin our statement with a brief presentation, just to provide some necessary context about the environment surrounding this case." Context. That word hit me wrong. I blinked as the screen on the far wall lit up. A projector buzzed softly. A PowerPoint interface blinked to life. And there it was, my face. Huge, blown up tenfold. My shoulders hunched. My expression mid-blink. Caught off guard. And below my face, the badge, clear as daylight, K, nobody. Gasps fluttered across the room like a wave breaking on a shore. A few people shifted in their seats. One juror raised their eyebrows. Another whispered to someone next to them. Celine's attorney gestured with one hand, smooth as a salesman. "This image was taken just this morning. We thought it was important to show how certain individuals have inserted themselves into this proceeding. Uninvited, unscheduled, and potentially unstable." Unstable. I gripped the bench so hard my nails pressed into the polished wood. I didn't move. Didn't blink. The lights made the sweat gather along my collarbone. I forced my jaw not to clench. I wasn't going to let them have that. The lawyer tapped the clicker again, bringing up a second slide. Metadata and timestamps. But something was off. The time code said the photo had been taken at 7:16 a.m., before court even opened. Before I arrived. That's not possible. I had parked at 7:52. I remembered because I had looked at the time while checking the court map. I had even taken a photo of the courthouse myself, time-stamped. My throat went dry. My mind clicked into place like gears grinding against one another. They'd faked it. Celine, or someone in her circle, had altered the timestamp metadata. She wasn't just humiliating me. She was framing me. A whisper from the judge broke the silence. Was Miss Monroe even on the witness list? The attorney's lips curled into something too smug to be accidental. "No, Your Honor." She appeared of her own volition. Walked in with that badge on. Sat herself down. And, he let his voice trail off like it pained him to say the rest. "You can't teach people boundaries." I turned my eyes toward Celine. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She knew I'd look. She simply straightened her skirt and watched the screen like she was proud of it. I'd seen this tactic before, years ago, 16 years old to be exact. Our parents had thrown a dual birthday party for us every year since we were children. But that year, Celine had forgotten to include my name on the invitation. The entire class had shown up thinking it was her party alone, and she never corrected them. That night, I'd sat on the swing set in the backyard, eating cake alone, pretending I was okay with it, pretending it didn't sting to be erased. This moment, this courtroom, was that same sting magnified in public. But this time, I wasn't 16, and I wasn't going to disappear. I closed my eyes for a beat, not to cry, to regroup. The courtroom murmured around me, but I was scanning, assessing. Then I noticed him. In the far back corner, a man sat quietly, arms folded, no notes, no laptop. His suit was worn but neat. His eyes weren't on the attorney. They were on Celine, unblinking, not smiling, watching her like someone who had seen a mask fall before. He didn't look like press. He didn't whisper to anyone. He just observed. And something about the way he leaned in when Celine spoke, it was like he was waiting. Not for the story, but for the moment she'd slip. He didn't take notes. He just watched Celine like he already knew what she was. Before I could piece together who the man in the back was, a soft rustling broke the tension. A clerk moved toward the judge with a sealed envelope. Plain, no markings, no stamps, just crisp and ominous. Something about the way the judge's brow furrowed told me it wasn't part of the original proceedings. Your Honor, the clerk said quietly, this was delivered just now, marked urgent. Anonymous sender. The judge opened it slowly, like peeling back something rotten. Silence swept through the courtroom again. His eyes scanned the contents, then paused longer than he should have. He glanced my way for a second that stretched far too long before turning to the court reporter. Please record this as an addendum to the hearing exhibits, he instructed, and tapped the document twice before setting it down with a heavy sigh. Then he looked straight at me. Miss Monroe, he said, voice measured but not unkind, are you aware that there's a psychological evaluation bearing your name from the Charleston Mental Health Institute dated November 2012? My pulse faltered. The words caught in my throat. That place, that year, I hadn't spoken of it in over a decade. I barely let myself think about it. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't healing. It was silence dressed up in sterile paperwork. The attorney stood again, lips curved into something too controlled to be sincere. Your Honor, we present this only to provide full context around Miss Monroe's mental stability. The document was unearthed by a concerned party. We believe it speaks volumes. The page turned on the projector, clinical, stark. Diagnosis, emotional instability, behavioral dysregulation. I didn't recognize the words because they weren't mine. They weren't me. I wasn't unstable. I was 22 and locked outside during a snowstorm by my sister. I was barefoot, sobbing after she had turned the deadbolt and turned off her phone. It was supposed to be funny, her friends laughing from the window. She'll be fine. She always freaks out over nothing. I had collapsed on the steps, half frozen, shaking uncontrollably until a neighbor called an ambulance. But the next morning, our mother had whispered, this is what happens when you overreact. People will think you're crazy. Do you want that? She drove me herself, quietly, deliberately to a hospital an hour away. She signed the papers. I stayed there for 72 hours. And when I got back, no one in the family brought it up again. Not even me. Not until now. My heart pounded like it was trying to claw its way out. But my face didn't move. I wouldn't give Celine the satisfaction of watching me break. She sat still at the table, hands folded, lips tight. But there was the faintest upward twitch at the corner of her mouth, like this was her masterpiece finally hanging on the gallery wall. This isn't therapy, I whispered to myself. It's erasure. Because that's what they did, reframed everything I survived into some shameful fiction. If you control the narrative, you don't need the truth. I glanced toward my mother. She was there, 2 rows behind Celine, clutching her handbag like it might explode. She didn't look at me. She looked down. Of course she did. The judge asked if I had any statement in response. I stood slowly and cleared my throat. My voice trembled, but not from fear. That file was created without my consent. I was never diagnosed. I was placed in that hospital by family members who wanted to avoid scrutiny, not because I was a danger to anyone. The real danger was being locked out in a storm for existing. A murmur rippled. The judge didn't respond, just nodded for the record to reflect my statement. No judgment. No acknowledgement. Just paper. Because in a courtroom, facts don't matter, only what's written. I sat down and caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. The man at the back, he stood for the first time. He walked with slow, purposeful steps, approached the bailiff and leaned in. They exchanged quiet words. Then the bailiff looked toward the bench and nodded once. The judge's eyes narrowed. He picked up the microphone. "Miss Monroe," he said again, "please remain seated. There's been a development." Celine's head whipped around, and for the first time all day, she looked afraid. The judge's gavel tapped twice, not to end the session, but to pause it. A ripple of tension moved through the room like heat off pavement. "We'll take a brief recess," he announced, though no one moved. "Counselors and parties involved, please join me in chambers." Vincent Wexler didn't wait for an invitation. He walked with a precision that felt military, his coat never wrinkling, his eyes never shifting. He passed Celine without so much as a glance, but she flinched anyway. I followed the flow of suits and silence down a narrow hallway to the private judicial chamber. The wood felt older here, less performative, like the truth had no need for grand architecture. The judge closed the door behind us. "Mr. Wexler, I assume you're not here on vacation." Vincent nodded once and placed a sealed manila envelope on the desk. A faint watermark from the Department of Justice shimmered under the chamber lights. "You'll want to review this before allowing the hearing to proceed further," he said evenly. "It pertains directly to the misuse of sealed federal records, namely Exhibit 14B, which was submitted to malign Miss Kaylin Monroe's credibility." Celine opened her mouth, probably to object, but the judge raised a hand. "You're saying Exhibit 14B was obtained illegally?" Vincent tapped the envelope. "She used a court system login credential not assigned to her. We've been monitoring several flagged queries made under Judge Harmon's staff access credentials dating back 2 months. All tied to this hearing. All tied to Miss Celine Monroe." I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. I watched as Celine's expression stiffened like fresh clay under heat. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You can't just barge in here with some vague accusation." "I'm not here to accuse," Vincent cut her off. "I'm here to confirm what we've already documented. You accessed mental health records sealed under HIPAA protections. That's a federal offense." The room went very still. Vincent turned slightly toward me but never softened. "We've been investigating a pattern of ethical violations tied to Miss Monroe's legal activities. This custody hearing gave us probable cause to expand scope." Celine looked at the judge like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You can't take his word over mine. I've worked in this system for years." "That's exactly why this is serious," the judge said flatly. "You know better." Celine's attorney, who had been silent so far, finally spoke. "We'll need time to review any evidence." Vincent was already flipping open the packet. The top page bore Celine's name, time-stamped login credentials, and a list of accessed files, including mine. "This isn't a gray area," Vincent said. "It's black-letter law. Miss Monroe's behavior suggests a pattern of manipulation that includes falsifying metadata and weaponizing sealed documents for personal advantage." And then he said the line that hit harder than anything I expected. "I'm not here to defend you, Miss Monroe," he told me. "I'm here to expose her." Something shifted inside me. Not relief, not triumph, just clarity. For years I'd thought maybe I'd misremembered, exaggerated, made too much of things. But here it was. Paper. Dates. Facts. Still, Celine wasn't done. She turned toward me slowly, her tone quiet but slicing. You think I'm scared of you? I built this courtroom. You're just a footnote I let stick around too long. My hands clenched, but not with fear. I stepped closer, voice low but steady. Then it's time to tear it down. The hallway felt colder when I stepped out of chambers, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees just for me. My heels echoed against the marble, the click-click cadence of a woman trying to keep it together. Celine was already there, leaned casually against the wall as if she hadn't just been exposed. Her face was calm, almost amused. She tilted her head when I approached. Cute little show back there, she said, her voice low and syrupy. But you should know it only takes one signature to have you held for a 72-hour mental health evaluation. You sure you want to keep pushing? Her words landed soft but stung sharp. Around us, courthouse staff moved with deliberate ignorance. No one made eye contact. No one intervened. That was the thing about power, it didn't have to be loud. It could whisper in hallways, dressed in a navy pantsuit and a smirk. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Not yet. My chest was tight, breath shallow. Celine smiled wider. Didn't think so, she said, brushing past like she'd won again. I didn't know where my feet were taking me until I found myself on the stone steps outside. The sun was out now, harsh and too bright, like it hadn't gotten the memo that everything inside me had gone dim. I sat down on a bench under a bare tree, just enough shade to hide in, not enough to comfort. A few pigeons scuffled around the edge of the sidewalk. I didn't look at them. I just stared at my hands, still shaking. A memory surfaced uninvited. I was 22. There had been a snowstorm, unexpected and brutal. I was locked out of our shared apartment because Celine forgot I was supposed to be home that weekend. I pounded on the door for 30 minutes before a neighbor let me in. That night, I had my first full-blown panic attack. Our mother told me I was being dramatic. A week later, I was in therapy, not to get better, to be quiet. Celine doesn't lie, my mother had said. She just remembers things better than you. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over Langston's contact. I typed, maybe it's not worth it. Then I stared at the blinking cursor for too long. You okay, ma'am? I looked up. A young woman stood a few feet away holding out a water bottle. Her courthouse badge read Naira. Her brown eyes were cautious, kind. I saw what happened, she said. That woman, your sister, she treats people like tissue paper. Uses them. Tosses them. I accepted the bottle. You work for her? Interned. Not anymore. A pause. Then she added, you didn't let her win yet, so don't. The words hit harder than they should have. I'd said something like that once years ago to a freshman at college whose roommate trashed her art project out of jealousy. I didn't even remember the girl's name, but I remembered her tears, and how she smiled when I told her not to give away her victory just because someone louder said she'd lost. I stood up. My body still felt unsteady, but something inside me had locked back into place. Naira watched me. Whatever you're about to do, make it hurt, she said, her tone half joking, half hopeful. I nodded. It won't just hurt. It'll echo. I walked to the far end of the courtyard and dialed Langston. He picked up on the first ring. Talk to me. I'm ready to file the motion, I said. Use the full clause. Whistleblower status. No redactions. There was a pause. Then the familiar grit of his voice returned. It's about time, Monroe, he said, and the phone went silent. By the time I stepped back into the courtroom, the air had shifted. The chatter was gone. The judge's assistant stood by the double doors, instructing reporters and visitors to leave. Close session. Only legal counsel, essential staff, and involved parties would remain. Langston gave me a subtle nod as I took my seat. His calm steadied me, until the opposing attorney stood up and requested permission to call an expert witness in defense of character context. That phrase alone sent warning bells through my chest. The judge adjusted his glasses. Proceed. The doors opened again. A tall, lean man with a goatee and cold, polished demeanor walked in. Dr. Adrian Wolfe, the clerk announced. My stomach turned. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Years ago, during the fallout of my second year at Harvard, he'd been mentioned once briefly by my department head, but I had never been his patient, never even spoken to him. Dr. Wolfe took the stand with a practiced ease. I'm a clinical psychiatrist with 22 years of experience, he began. During the Harvard International Fellowship cycle, I was consulted regarding a fellow named Cailin Monroe, concerns of erratic behavior, emotional dysregulation, and institutional defiance. A ripple of murmurs. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I heard someone, Langston, maybe, say, objection. But it was drowned out in the sudden noise. The judge rapped his gavel once. Let him finish. Then you may rebut. Celine sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in her lap, gaze locked on me like she was watching a performance she'd already seen the ending to. Dr. Wolfe continued, though no inpatient treatment was formally mandated, I advised temporary leave from duties. It's my professional opinion that Miss Monroe's profile reflected patterns of paranoia and displacement. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to stand. To scream. But I did neither. I waited. I needed to wait. Langston slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, a scanned letter bearing the signature of Professor Leah Marks, the fellowship director. I unfolded the sheet with shaky fingers. It read. To whom it may concern, Cailin Monroe remained in active standing during all fellowship duties. She was never placed under evaluation, nor did she meet with any psychiatric staff. Any statement to the contrary is inaccurate and not reflected in institutional records. The judge asked if I had anything to submit. I stood. Your Honor, I respectfully request permission to present sealed records from my academic file, including internal grievances and personal statements, on the record. And I'd like to be the one who reads them. There was a pause, a long one. The judge looked at me for a beat, then nodded once. I opened the folder. My hands were cold. I had memorized every word over the years, but this was the first time I'd ever said them aloud. I, Cailin Monroe, filed a confidential harassment complaint against 3 peer fellows on March 17, 2014. No action was taken. Flip. On May 9, 2014, I was treated for a stress-induced ulcer following months of work sabotage. I was told I was overreacting. Flip. Emails between Professor Marks and the grant committee indicate concern about interpersonal targeting, with Cailin as the documented target. I kept going. The courtroom was silent. No coughs, no rustling paper, just my voice and the truth. Celine didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. When I reached the final page, I paused. I was told, you always make things harder than they need to be. That wasn't a diagnosis. That was a warning. I folded the record closed with trembling fingers and looked straight into Celine's eyes. Outside the courtroom, the early fall breeze rustled through the live oaks lining Broad Street. I stood at the base of the courthouse steps, taking in the stillness before the storm. My breath fogged faintly in the cool morning air, the silence around me oddly soothing. I hadn't slept much in the past week, not since the hearing adjourned, not since I read those words aloud. But for the first time in a long while, I hadn't woken up feeling small. As I entered the courthouse lobby, I caught whispers, a hushed tension in the air like something unscripted was unfolding. Two clerks near the security desk were murmuring, just barely audible. "Did you hear who's presiding today?" I thought Judge Mariel had this docket. "No, Mariel's out sick. Substitution was filed late last night. Monroe's on the bench now." I paused mid-step. "Monroe?" "Not me, Langston." My stomach dropped and flipped at the same time. I walked slowly through the metal detector, my bag held tight against my chest. By the time I stepped into the gallery, all eyes were already forward. The court officer stood tall by the door. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Langston E. Monroe presiding." I froze. He entered from the side door in full robe, stoic, unreadable, not even a flicker of recognition on his face. The same man who once traced constellations on my back at 2 a.m. was now seated behind the elevated bench, wooden gavel in hand, judicial calm masking the fire I knew burned beneath. Celine, seated 2 rows up with her attorney, let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You have got to be kidding me. Her fiancé gets to decide the case now? What's next? Jury made up of bridesmaids?" Langston lifted his head slightly. "Miss Monroe, please be advised I filed my judicial recusal from all familial affiliations effective 3 weeks ago. My assignment today is strictly procedural and was confirmed through the clerk's office." He tapped the file in front of him. "Now, shall we proceed?" Celine shrank back, lips pursed tight. Her voice didn't carry that same confidence anymore. Langston turned to the courtroom assistant. "Please enter into Record Exhibit 7C, full audit disclosure of Monroe Family Trust and associated nonprofit activities." The screen came alive behind him. Lines of figures, names of vendors, timestamps, wire transfers. I'd seen the paperwork, yes, but hearing it read aloud by someone with the power to act on it made my skin tingle. Langston's voice was even, but every word was a scalpel. "According to this report, $480,000 was funneled from the Monroe Women's Education Fund through Shell vendors, Shellheart Consulting, Red Tree Digital, and Astor Foundation, all traced back to Miss Celine Monroe's personal accounts." Celine opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. Her lawyer pressed a hand to his brow. Langston continued, tone firm. "These transfers occurred during fiscal years when the trust was inactive, meaning Kaylin Monroe's portion was frozen but used as silent collateral in private debt clearance." I sat still. I didn't interrupt. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. This was not vengeance. This was verification. Langston looked down at the bench, then back to the parties. "The court finds substantial cause to pursue a civil breach inquiry under Fiduciary Violation Code 38.4b. Effective immediately, this matter is referred to the Department of Justice for investigation." Celine flinched. I watched her eyes dart left, then right, searching for an exit that wasn't there. Langston didn't look at me once, not even after the ruling. He stood, nodded toward the clerk, and exited the bench as cleanly as he had entered. Only then did I stand too, but not to follow him. I turned toward the back of the courtroom and caught my reflection in the tall glass panel near the door. Same dark suit, same posture. But something was different. My face didn't look small anymore. I didn't look like someone waiting to be picked or protected or proven. I looked like someone who finally belonged. And not because I fought louder. I didn't win because I yelled. I won because I waited. I proved. And I refused to disappear. The courtroom was beginning to empty. Shoes clicked against the old marble floors, paper shuffled into briefcases, and distant chatter hummed like an engine winding down. I had just reached the tall oak doors, fingers grazing the cold brass handle, when I heard it. Your Honor, we request an emergency injunction. The words sliced through the room like glass on stone. I turned. Celine's attorney was on his feet, waving a legal motion in the air like a flag of desperation. This entire session is compromised. Conflict of interest. The presiding judge is the romantic partner of the petitioner. We believe bias has tainted every ruling. Celine's eyes were wide, not frightened, but electric. She was smiling again. The same smile she wore when she cornered me in the hallway last week. The same one she wore the day she forged my name on that grant. Langston had already stepped down, protocol observed, but he turned back slightly, his mouth set in a line. The bailiff retrieved the motion and passed it to the clerk. Within moments, it landed in the hands of Judge Margaret Evelyn Rodas, retired, but pulled in for emergency review. Judge Rodas has taken emergency oversight, the clerk announced. Please remain seated. I did not speak. Not yet. Celine, now almost giddy, leaned into her attorney's shoulder and whispered something. His chest puffed. He must have thought they'd backed me into a corner. I reached into my bag, the same leather portfolio I'd carried since the first hearing, the same one my father gave me when I graduated. I hadn't opened it publicly until now. I walked back toward the bench, heels deliberate, pulse steady. I handed the sealed envelope to the clerk, who passed it along. Your Honor, I said calmly, that document contains an affidavit notarized 2 months before my father passed away. I ask that it be entered into the sealed record. Judge Rodas adjusted her glasses. Do you understand what this means, Miss Monroe? Once I open this, we proceed under sworn admission. There's no taking it back. I understand, I said. The judge broke the wax seal, her brows lifting ever so slightly as she began reading. She paused once, then twice, and then read aloud. Franklin J. Monroe, being of sound mind and clear intent, do hereby declare that the initial concept funding and operational proposal for the Monroe Women's Education Fund were the sole creation of Kaylin Monroe. I insisted her sister, Celine, be presented as the face of the foundation only to protect the family's image and to secure traditional donor confidence. I deeply regret this decision. The courtroom didn't erupt. It imploded silently. The words continued, signed, dated, witnessed, notarized. I took from Kaylin what she built. I let Celine pretend. I told myself it was for the greater good, but I know now it was cowardice. Celine shot up. This is fake. He would have never. Judge Rodas held up a palm. Sit down, Miss Monroe. Celine's mouth opened, then closed. Her voice, for the first time, had nowhere to go. Judge Rodas continued, the motion to suspend proceedings on the basis of conflict is denied. The document provided is valid. Furthermore, based on this affidavit and accompanying financial disclosures, this court rules that Miss Celine Monroe shall be removed from all founding and operational documents of the Monroe Women's Education Fund, effective immediately. She looked up, her voice firm. You may have had the spotlight, Miss Celine, but the light was never yours. Celine sat slowly. Her attorney pressed his fingers to his temple, already sensing the appeals process forming like storm clouds. The clerk walked toward me with a fresh copy of the revised Articles of Incorporation. My name alone now sat at the top, founder. I took the paper with steady hands and said nothing. There was nothing to say that the truth hadn't already spoken louder. The sun was beginning to dip outside the courtroom windows, casting long amber light across the benches. It touched Celine's face, but for once, she wasn't basking in it. She looked smaller now, not ruined, but exposed. And me? I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a woman who'd been walking with stones in her pockets for years and finally set them down. Truth, it turns out, isn't a firework. It's a weight. One that settles so deeply no one can lift it for you. But once it lands, there's no denying it exists. Power didn't look like shouting. It looked like holding the truth until it was too heavy to ignore. 3 weeks passed. The courthouse had faded into memory. Not gone, but quieter now, like thunder after a storm. My name had been cleared, my rights restored, my work legally mine again. But freedom, that was still something I was learning how to carry. That morning, I arrived early, before the staff, before the noise, before the world. The sun was barely stretching over the rooftops, casting amber streaks across the sidewalk in front of the new center. A pair of sparrows hopped along the concrete, as if they too were checking the place out. The community center had been rebuilt from the inside out, literally. The court had ordered full financial restitution. The shell companies were shut down. The crooked contracts revoked. Every siphoned dollar clawed back and returned. Inside, it smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. The walls, now a soft dove gray, were bare for now, waiting for art from the girls who would soon fill this space. I walked through the hall slowly, touching door frames, window ledges, the edges of the bulletin board in the common room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to brace myself before turning a corner. There were no shadows left to dodge. It was mine now, all of it. Not just on paper. In truth, Celine hadn't apologized. She hadn't looked at me since the ruling. A week ago, she'd held a brief press conference, just long enough to announce her voluntary step back from public leadership to focus on personal reflection. She didn't say my name. She didn't say sorry. She blamed the shifting culture and miscommunication, like the foundation had simply malfunctioned on its own. People asked me if I wanted to go on air, respond. Some even pitched a book deal. I said no to all of it. Let her fill the silence with spin. I was done filling mine with defense. Langston had visited once, just once. He didn't bring flowers or excuses, just stood beside me while we watched the staff prep the art tables. He asked gently, "Do you want me to stay?" I took a long breath before answering, "I think I need to see who I am without someone rescuing me," I said. Even if that someone meant well. He nodded. He didn't argue. He just placed a hand on my shoulder for a moment, then left. Some things I've learned aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to be remembered, right? Later that morning, I stopped by the art room. A handful of girls were already there, led by a new volunteer named Ari. She was no older than 20, eyes bright behind thick glasses. One of the girls, maybe 8 or 9 years old, was sitting at the far end of the table, working intently with red paper in her small hands. When I approached, she glanced up and smiled shyly. Without a word, she held something out to me. It was a paper crane, folded neatly, carefully, the wings a bit lopsided but proud. I froze. Years ago, I'd made one just like it. I had given it to Celine when we were teens after she'd won her first debate competition. I thought it was a gesture, a quiet token of sisterhood. She'd laughed, crumpled it, said I was always doing weird little things that no one asked for. Now here was a child offering me the same shape. No sarcasm, no demand, just something beautiful made with care and given freely. I took the crane gently from her hand. It was still warm from her fingers. "Thank you," I said, voice hushed. She beamed. "I make them when I feel calm." "Maybe you needed one." I nodded. Maybe I did. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, brushing the sidewalk with gold. I stepped out with the paper crane still in my hand, sunlight on my face. And for once, I didn't need to explain anything to anyone. Not to Celine, not to Langston, not to the media, or the past, or the pages of sealed affidavits. Because sometimes healing doesn't roar. Sometimes it folds itself into a small red crane and says, "You're allowed to begin again." The crane was still warm from the girl's hand. I tucked it close and walked into the sun.